And joining us here in the studio to talk more about this is Dr. Dan Diker. He's president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Diker. Appreciate you joining us. Can you help us understand the nuances of this fragile Syrian coalition government that has formed, obviously, after Assad has fled?
Absolutely, Kerry. Syria is still a flashpoint for jihadi and Islamist warfare activity. And Israeli intelligence had determined in no uncertain terms that, believe it or not, the Houthis, under the influence and supply and direction and financing of the Iranian regime, together with Jamaat Islamiyah, which is a Sunni extremist organization, and other proxies of Iran extremist organizations are planning attacks against Israel from Syria. So President Trump, on the one hand, he's really bet the house on Ahmad al-Shara, inviting him to Washington. But President al-Shara has not yet demonstrated that he is in control of Syria from a security standpoint. So Israel has its eyes and ears wide open, and it had to go in and do this counterterror operation because they had acute intelligence that attacks were planned from the air and across the border into Israel. So that's what Israel and the United States will have to talk about in the upcoming meeting between Netanyahu and Trump.
Can you go a level deeper on the complexities for al-Shara? Because there are so many different ethnicities and constituents within Syria, and you had mentioned he has not yet been able to rein all of those in after the fall of Assad. What's actually the job for him to rein in all those different constituencies?
Well, he's got a very complex job that neither you and I would want to take over if we were the president of Syria. Let's remember al-Shara was one of the leaders of al-Qaeda and ISIS in his jihadi days, and now he's being watched very carefully by the free world, led by President Trump, to see if he's really changed those colors. One word on al-Shara, it's called Turkey. Turkey is the dominant power in Syria right now. It dominates northwestern Syria, and it is very much, Turkey is very much an adversary for the Kurdish minority in Syria, and we know what happened in the Kurdish communities in southern Syria, where Israel had to send in troops to help the Kurds survive what was a massacre under al-Shara's watch. So there are all kinds of there are 10 different minority groups in Syria that al-Shara has to coalesce, and in the Middle East, everything is clans, tribes, and families. And so the notion of a Western Westphalian nation state, unified under a common president, is a very odd animal in the Middle East, and that is why Israel is really standing at the ready, crouching, watching Syria to the north, watching Lebanon, watching al-Shara to see if he can exercise control, and he has not done that yet. It has to be very clear that jihad is still very much Islamist warfare, and these proxies of both Shia Iran and Sunnis, and even under the direction of the Turks, which, by the way, these are Muslim Brotherhood countries, Turkey, Qatar, these are Muslim Brotherhood countries that have been inciting other Islamists from China to India to throughout the region, and Israel knows this well, and Israel is leading the West's sort of counterterrorism operation in order to stabilize the Middle East. It's Israel that's fighting everyone's war. So the fact that al-Shara called it a war crime, it looks very nice on social media for people to jump on that bandwagon. At the end of the day, Israel is the counterterror force that is leading the fight for stability, security, and hopefully prosperity and peace for the entire Middle East.
Yeah, the optics are interesting. Israel is actually his best friend as he attempts to try to maintain peace, as Trump certainly is backing him. But if he doesn't look weak, if he doesn't look strong against Israel, he may lose some of that coalition, which brings me to this question of Syria. Is one Syrian nation really the best structure for so many different competing interests? Obviously, that's a huge can of worms with all of the other regional things happening in the Middle East, but does that have the legs to really remain as one unified nation?
Well, that's a great question, and I think you're hitting the heart of the issue, and that is there is no Western-type nation-state in the Middle East that has really succeeded over time. I mean, look at Iraq, look at Syria, look at Jordan. Jordan's a monarchy and has held everything together as a monarchy, but there are always competing interests by the tribes, clans, and families and notable families in those states. And clearly, the clan structure is the natural structure. The United Arab Emirates, that is the natural structure of the Middle East, and trying to sort of force a united Syria is a very, very big haul. And I know that that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump have talked about this very frequently. But you saw very clearly just a couple of months ago the massacre of Druze in Syria. That was done by Bedouin tribes. That was done, under al-Shara's watch, and he couldn't prevent it. So you have all of these competing interests. By the way, not only competing interests, he survived 3 assassination attempts himself from these same, these are Bedouin tribes and also Iran regime-friendly proxies. So this is the Middle East, and the notion of creating a united, secure, and stable Syria is far more complex than just is reflected in the Trump vision, as important a vision it is for the Middle East. And clearly the Saudis, 1,600,000,000 Muslims are watching very carefully at how things play out. So you're absolutely right. The way things look in the Middle East is more important than actually what happens. And your point is very important, that if al-Shara looks weak perceptually to the Muslim world and the Arab 350, 400 million Arabs, that could collapse the entire enterprise. So you're really talking about competing interests and competing perceptions within the Arab world and between Syria, Israel, and of course, under the context of the United States vision for a new, stable, secure, and prosperous Middle East.
And it's quite interesting because most of the focus is on how to rebuild and keep the peace in Gaza and extricate Hamas, but Syria could become this new vacuum of violence. So I want to understand, you've mentioned what's inside of Syria. What you mentioned also, Erdogan, Iran, what are the Saudi Arabia, how do they all back the various constituents that are inside of Syria?
Well, that's a complex question for the very few minutes that we have, but clearly what we are trying to avoid is another October 7th massacre by Hamas. Hamas is not just about Gaza. Hamas is about jihadi groups throughout the Middle East. And what Israel is actually doing in Syria, which I didn't mention in the previous answer, it is defining and securing defensible borders for itself. Let's remember, the Golan Heights, and Mount Hermon, which is in southern Syria, is several thousand feet above sea level, and those are the eyes and ears looking into Damascus, some 20 kilometers north, as well as into Amman, Jordan. So from there, Israel has topographical advantage. They have strategic depth. And remember, Israel is such a small country that if it doesn't maintain defensible borders on the other side of its border after the October 7th massacre, it could very well be destroyed by these competing terror proxy forces. And that is why we have buffer zones, demilitarization zones, which is exactly what is being discussed now, what the President and the Prime Minister are going to talk about. Also in Syria, about 15 kilometers, also in Lebanon, and also in Gaza. If Israel has defensible borders, the whole Middle East is going to be far more secure and stable than it is right now.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Israel, of course, only the size of New Jersey, a very small strip of land. What are the other security challenges for Israel? Hezbollah to the north, the situation potentially not resolving in Gaza. What is the primary security challenges for Israel outside of what we've already discussed, Syria?
The Iranian regime. And again, the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime is rebuilding its nuclear terror facilities and its ballistic missile capabilities. The strike in June of 2025 of Israel and the United States, combined strike on Iran's military and ballistic capabilities, has only bought the West about 2 years. And Israel has excellent human intelligence within Iran, but it is the Iranian regime that is really the puppet master, that with the push of a button can mobilize scores of proxy terror groups around the Middle East, and that's exactly what Hamas knows. So what Hamas is doing now, just to get to the Gaza part of your question, is to do everything to prevent any kind of stability and security in Syria, in Lebanon. It has bases. The Hamas has a base in Turkey. They also have Hamas Lebanon, Hamas Syria. So it is not just limited to the Gaza Strip. This is an international Muslim Brotherhood jihadi organization that has many other organizations that work with it to destabilize. So that is Israel's challenge, and it's the United States' challenge. And this is where U.S. and Israeli interests, they converge at the end. The end game converges, but the pathway is a rocky pathway of terror on the way to what both leaders see as a more secure Middle East. And that's where, that's where Israel has to really take care of its immediate military security. And the United States doesn't have to face that because it has 9,000 miles between it and where we're sitting today in studio. So this is really the lack of convergence on the way to a shared end game that everyone wants for the Middle East.
Yeah, certainly October 7th showed us a new level of barbarism that nobody has really ever seen in decades. It would the depths of it were so horrifying. What does Israel need to do to guide the situation in Gaza toward an outcome that will ensure its own security?
You're absolutely right. October 7th was actually 13 September 11th in 24 hours. In terms of the number of people that were killed, proportional to Israel's size and population. And the world after October 7th changed, and in the sense that Israel's whole national security concept changes, now goes to prevention, which is why you see very powerful Israeli attacks in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Gaza. Now, Gaza is an emerging situation. The Trump 20-point plan, which is supposed to be in stage 2 right now, but there is no Arab or international force carry that will take on Hamas militarily. So why do we say that? Because it really brings us to this international security force, which the UN had just approved in its recent National Security Council vote. But Israel is the only security force in the Middle East or anywhere in the international scene that has the political will, the moral will, and the military capability of disarming Hamas. That is the key point to the Trump plan, the 20-point Trump plan. Disarm the Hamas, demilitarize Gaza. Neither of that has happened yet. So we're in a very, very critical moment right now. And this is what President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu will discuss in their upcoming meeting in Washington, is how does Israel, together with American cooperation and partnership and alliance, disarm the Hamas? Remember, this is a jihadi force, and in jihad, it is either victory or martyrdom. There is nothing in between. So Netanyahu's statement since October 8th, 2023 of total victory, that reflects exactly the strategy that any Western power has to take against Islamic warfare and jihad, and nothing less. That's where we are now. And in order to make the 20-point plan work, it requires the defeat of Hamas.
Well, Dr. Dan Diker, so much to unpack there. As you say, the 20-point plan wasn't supposed to be 3 or 4 points and then a long pause, but that is essentially where we're at. And certainly the meeting with Netanyahu and Trump will be pivotal to see what the next few weeks should encounter. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.